Vin.
I'm Sori.
That's Sparky.
And Salty. Hey, check out, I put Chip over here. Woo! The big homie's hanging out now.
Thanks, Germ. We got a special guest in the house.
Hi, I'm Tina. Hi, I'm Tina. Pleased to meet you all. Hi, villagers. Pleased to meet you.
So this is a historic moment because Tina is the first villager that's actually going to do a review with us.
Yeah.
So I am pretty freaking excited.
Yeah, and Tina's been with us since we were like
450.
Like 450 subs. So
450 subs.
Been around for a long time.
Yeah, a whole 3 months.
Yeah.
So we're just it's cool because I remember the very first time we had the idea of, hey, let's do a song with a villager.
Yeah.
And so now it's come to fruition. If you want to know how to do that, hit us up, vinandsori@gmail.com. We'll give you more details. But
they do it too. I promise. This is not a setup. They do it.
We do. But and of course we've done interviews and all that with OTEP. OTEP's the most recent one. We're releasing that pretty soon. Patreon already has it, but like it's cool. Obviously, we love interviewing the people that we're doing the music with. But
this is also another cool angle.
This is a cooler angle, in my opinion, because this is a villager. This is an actual somebody from our community. Not to say that we don't love the musicians, but these are people that have said, I commit to being in the village, doing the village thing. So I'm just really happy, Tina, that you're online with us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be. This is the first time. I mean, I've done radio interviews when I used to do freelance journalism. One of them even at the BBC in London. But this is the first time doing anything like this.
Yeah.
And like, I'm thrilled to be here because you two are really cool people.
Thanks.
Awesome. Okay, now we're going to be reviewing. Tell us what we're reviewing, Tina.
Right. This is a band from the UK called Mithras. That's spelled Mithras. And I'm not 100% sure if they took it from the Roman god Mithras or the Roman religion Mithras. But to this, right? I first met this band in 1999, back in London. I was writing for a magazine called Terrorizer. This is when I was male. And I got to meet the bands, check out some of their demos, and I got to review one of their albums. And it kind of caused a bit of a controversy because it's like, to me, this is like the best sounding like death metal style of music ever to come out of the UK. To me, their sound and their scope are just like, they like when do you like driving fast cars really fast? You know that feeling of elation you get, right? For me, music like this and extreme music gives me that elation. And it gives me the goosebumps and tingles. This is a band that musically that have been unfairly compared to Morbid Angel. Now there's a band that you guys need to talk about, Morbid Angel, especially you, Vin. I think you might have something to sink your teeth into there. Basically, Morbid Angel kind of founded the modern death metal sound and style with their album Formulas Fatal to the Flesh. It was really sort of took them off. But Mithras have developed their own sound, their own style, their own power and scope. And Mithras in the studio are a two-piece. Raina Goss, who does bass and vocals, and Leon Macy, who does the drums and the guitar. And he also just recently, the band sort of like have been sporadic in releases. They've released like 4 albums since '98. And last time there was like a gap of like 9 years between this current album, which came out in 2016, and their previous one. And this is the title track on the latest album. It's the last track on the album, and it closes the album, but kind of puts it back to the beginning, like on Strange Loops. And this is the band where they're really starting to come out into their own in terms of sound and style. Now they do play live, but they get a drummer, and when you hear how quick this guy goes and how tight his playing is, right, you'll be surprised at how they can get another drummer that can play like he does for live. But this is a great album. It's something to definitely, if you've not heard this kind of stuff before, you might enjoy it. Guitar playing is phenomenal. So with all my love to you and to all the villagers. This is Mithras on Strange Loops.
Awesome. And we're never heard the song before.
No.
It's gonna get the regular Vin and Sori treatment.
Yep.
Just because Tina's here and that's our people.
Yep.
We're just gonna hear it straight up and give an
Don't,
honest.
don't sugarcoat it.
So let's play it. Let's play it and let's see what we got here.
Go.
Whoa. What I was looking for, because it's the website I'm looking at, Tina, to find the lyrics, is the band website, and so they've got the names of all the songs, and I noticed that the name of the first song on this record is "Why Do We Live?"
Why Do We Live? Yeah.
And then the last line on the last record of the song is "Why Did We Live?"
Oh.
So the first song on the record is called
Yeah.
"Why Do We Live?" And then,
it
the
was
last,
like, why did we?
the last line on the last song is "Why Did We Live?"
Yeah.
That's pretty smart. I
Yeah.
wonder if people realize how hard it is to write a concept record.
Well, it's kind of like there's like repeating themes. Have you noticed in life and in history, life and history tends to repeat itself,
Right.
in just like different variants? It's kind of like that. And the concept of this album is that humans have like evolved beyond corporeal beings, and are sort of basically out in space, and it journeys what they do and why and stuff like that. And what is really cool in one of the songs, in the final solo, they begin the next song in the solo as it kind of, because it all blends.
Whoa.
Okay, so Strange Loops is this sort of, we're in this like endless loop
cycle
of cyclical repetition of
life and everything else.
and all the shit that goes on in between.
Yeah.
Okay, so I love irony in lyrics, and I love like
Yes, you do.
rearranging words, like Danny Filth did, like
Uh-huh.
"Die is cast and we were cast out to die."
Mm-hmm.
So the the beginning line, the first two lines, "Nearing the beginning of an end"
Yep.
was just the end of our beginning.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
'Cause it's got the concept of the loop,
Yeah.
right? Like, what was it? And this concept of like being stuck in sort of an endless loop, like Groundhog Day was
I
sort
was
of.
just thinking about that, yeah.
That's like the comedic side of the idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's.
But
Go ahead.
couldn't you also say that maybe if you were kind of so inclined, and this is your perception, because you know what they say, perception is reality, and everyone's perception of reality is different. Could you also say that perhaps maybe there's some reincarnation themes?
In this song?
Well, kind of, not necessarily, but maybe like on the outside of it, you know, I would say a little bit. You know, you can sort of like, you talk about endlessly going like, this doesn't mean reincarnation, you sort of rebirth, constantly repeat.
Yeah, and help us out here, villagers, because I'm sure somebody believes in reincarnation, but from my understanding, I don't know if it's Buddhism or Hinduism, it's basically you keep coming back until you work off your karma. But you're kind of in a cyclical, repetitive, you know, back and forth with.
Well, it's kind of interesting because sometimes, I mean, I'm 51. I'm 51, undergoing my second puberty, thanks to female hormones. Hooray! But
What's that like?
Yeah.
Sorry.
What's that like?
It's interesting. It's chaotic. You get to deal with things. See, like for me, I think I didn't know I was trans till I was 46. Because for everybody, it's different. Some people know from very young. Some people know and bury it. Some people just don't know that they are consciously. As you can tell, I'm not from America. I came here 16 years ago. I actually came for a holiday because one of my friends who runs a punk rock radio station in Washington, he used to live in Austin. He was living in London. We met at a goth club. And you know, goth and black metal. There was poetry readings, all that kind of stuff, and what have you.
Really?
And my friend Stephen, he came back to Austin because he had personal business to take care of. He was divorcing his first wife because she was in love with another woman. So he said to me, like, you know, we talk on the phone, and this is remember back in the day when phone calls were expensive. He said, like, come out and visit sometime. You know how people talk? Well, I did. and I met my second wife back then, and I traveled between London and Austin. I did like 9 flights in 2 years. I did a lot of stuff, but it's just like, for me, all the stuff that went wrong when I thought I was male, I feel like being as a trans girl, I've got the chance to relive again.
So like you're on the second loop.
Yeah, I'm on my own strange loop, that's for sure. Yes.
Yeah. Well, so are we.
I never.
Right. I mean.
Well, I mean, it's isn't Christ a rebirth?
Right, a resurrection, right, would be, and then, or even becoming a Christian.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about personal.
Like, as a person?
It's supposed to be a rebirth, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, for sure.
So it's a similar thing. I went through a lot just to get where I am here now. I feel now that I've got a chance to live the life that I never had, because I wasn't who I was. See, you often talk of male and female, you two, in music, but you two are separate, male and female. I'm male and female inside.
Don't you think everybody is to some degree?
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, this is just gender identity is fluid. To me, it's like sexuality. Like, you have the Kinsey scale. Like they say 10% is only pure homosexual, 10% is only pure heterosexual, and everyone's a kind of blend in between. Well, I think gender identity is the same thing.
So, like, what's his name? I forgot who the guy was, and I always love to quote people, and I'm spacing on who the guy was, but basically, he was talking about a lot of the Judaistic interpretations of what the hell was going on in Genesis 2 with Adam and Eve. And there's this one perspective that Adam was basically both. And so God had to kind of separate him, basically pull him apart. That's where you get the whole idea of the side, right?
Side?
It doesn't say rib.
Yes, I know. We had this discussion
side.
before.
So anyway, Adam is both, and then God basically tears them apart, and then they come back together as a sort of union type of thing. That's in Judaism.
I actually like. To me, something that's far more simpler in the Kabbalah. Yahweh, is it the YHWH?
Yeah.
Rather than Yahweh, as in spelled in Christianity, apparently it literally translates to He/She. Because to me, God is genderless. He's both.
Well, right. I mean, any sort of gender assignment to God obviously is metaphorical.
Irrelevant.
Right.
Because he's a spirit. So that's a very interesting concept about, like, so why do you think he called it strange loops? Because I get the concept of loops where you kind of die and you're reborn, and then you go, I mean, obviously we don't believe in reincarnation, but we have been on this kind of a weird, this kind of loop in our life where you have a do-over.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, people know that we're remarried, right? So it's like, okay, boom, here's another loop.
Yeah. And
so
it is kind of strange in a sense. I think it's strange because it's like, hey, wait, I already did this, and shit went bad.
Well, I think everything is connected. I think the answers to everything are all before us. I think the trick is, there's just me, my opinion. This is my arsehole. Opinions. Everyone's got like an arsehole. Everyone's got one. I think that the truth is out there, and it's just like working out the connections. Yeah. I don't think we're ever meant to know everything. We're not supposed to. And this is part of, I think, what mankind's drive is. What's really interesting is that in between this album and the last one, Leon, the guitarist and the drummer, he did it just, apparently this is quote unquote just for fun, he did his degree in astrophysics.
Just for fun.
Just for fun.
Just for fun. But the thing is, I think that to me, like when people think of the cosmos, if you're to relate it to anything here, to me, I see it like the sea, because the sea is always moving, the energy is always there. To me, life is always something in the moment. It's happening, it's bursting, you know. And I think there are many things that we've accepted as gospel, to excuse the pun, that really aren't truthful, because I think people, it's a bit like dinosaurs. You know how they think like certain dinosaurs were built a certain way when they first started finding dinosaur bones,
Right.
and then they realized they got it wrong. I think it's something that as a society we're doing the same thing. I think now especially there are lots of more of the social aspects of, like, you talk about Jerusalem and Israel and stuff like that. Like in the regular standard Bible, there are the books of the Apocrypha missing, which you might get in the Jerusalem Bible. I think they are kept within the Catholic Bible even. But there's a lot of history, about what went on, because at one point Israel and Judah were separate. They were separate nations. And I can't remember if it was Israel or Judah actually signed an accord with the Roman Empire where they became like allies in the books of the Apocrypha.
Yeah, during the Second Temple period, you had the elites, basically. So you had the Sanhedrin, and then you had the Pharisees, and then you had the Sadducees, and they basically made up the ruling elite, and they basically were in bed with Rome, right, which is one of the levers that they pulled to get Jesus crucified. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, later on in Revelation, when you, at least from our interpretation, when you have this woman riding the beast, or the whore riding the beast, it's being critical of that system of Judaism, which has basically sold out its loyalty to Yahweh and turned it over to the beast, which was Caesar, right? And so, like, which is interesting, because it's sort of very ironic, because it's basically saying the marriage of the church and state is the woman riding the beast. Mm-hmm. So it's like, it's this very, very strange thing that Christians have to figure out, like, okay, we do want separation of church and state, we don't want separation of church and state, but then when John reflects on the current milieu, and he reflects on how the church, or how religion, gets combined with the state's power, how fucked up it is. Yeah. He criticizes it in very extreme. Yeah,
that's interesting.
Very extreme language, and then basically what happens at the end of Revelation is that the beast turns on the whore and eats her alive, and all this terrible shit, which is what happened, right? The Romans turned against the Jews and destroyed them all in 70 AD. It's a pretty...
Have you told me that before?
No, not that way. But then I was talking to Tina. And
Tina, you brought that out on this one.
It all connected. You're mute.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that science and religion are not mutually exclusive.
I agree with that.
Right. I think my point was that there is lots about history that we've accepted a certain way and that we're finding out is wrong. I watched a documentary where they talked about how Judaism became a monotheistic religion that may have been brought to Israel by the Babylonians. Mm-hmm. And before that, there was that the Jews did have their own pantheon.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's
and
I alluded to this a little bit about henotheism, which henotheism is just really another way of speaking of a pantheon with a main god, a most high god.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's clear evidence in the Torah that was the view of the world, at least from the authors. And then, as time progressed, they became more and more, like when you get to Isaiah, it gets to be more and more monotheistic, as if Yahweh's the only one up there.
Right. And that there's,
but there are other passages where there's like a whole council.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so it's very interesting stuff. So the song is about being on these loops. How do you take, we aim to trace the steps to paradise.
Well, you skipped the line that I kind of liked.
Oh.
I liked, so born on strange loops, we burst into life and decay into death, dreaming in alternate planes of existence. And I thought, like, that reminded me of, you know, like when you go to sleep and like you're somewhere else, or like you think, or like sometimes like wherever we are, like we kind of want to be somewhere else, and so you start, like, your mind kind of goes off and you dream in other planes of existence. So it's like this strange thing where we are is not where we are. Sometimes we go to other places. I just like that part. And you know,
Well, I mean, that's when you start getting into astral planes, and you know, people that astral drift and that kind of stuff. That, you know, you have people that do that. You know,
what is that, like out-of-body experiences, like that?
But for a lot of Christians, I think the thing is, the truth is like a few ears of corn in a large pile of chaff, and I think those that have ears and a heart to hear it will find the truth. And I think those that don't or don't want to won't. But I think that the thing is, my point is that the last barrier to human freedom of consciousness and guilt and repression, that this is where I think a lot of black metal and stuff comes from. The anger is that the hypocrisy within Christianity, the hypocrisy and guilt and repression. I think that if you follow the principle of, you know, once Christ was crucified and died and the temple curtain was torn, the gap between man and God was gone, and that people could connect to God and God would just take them as they are. I mean, my personal belief is that if there is a God, that God is out there, and to me, God is in everything. In the air is so vast and so big that he could be as small as a subatomic particle. And I think that as time goes on, the gaps, the connections that we've got wrong about religion and science will eventually, through our technological advancements and understanding and relearning, will disappear. And I think that, I think, you know, people talk about an all-judging God. I don't think so. I think, you know, God judges us the way we judge other people. And I think where you start to get into, especially in today's age of attack, especially in media and what have you, is that I think opinion can be another word for judgment.
Well, yeah, you know, it's like we were talking about this too, with the whole science and spirituality sort of like dichotomy, and we're talking about DMT. I've made references to DMT and psilocybin a few times, and it's like, you know, dimethyltryptamine, I think is the official term, and it's people take this drug, right, and then they go off into, I mean, are you familiar with this, Tina?
No. Well, the thing is, one of the guys that I work with, he's taken them, and he went on some like trips. I've not done anything like that.
Right.
You know,
YouTube, we're not recommending anybody take DMT.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done my share of like hard drugs.
Yeah.
But that's a different subject for a different time. And I will have to be in the presence of my lawyer.
But like, so here is my thought process. It's like, you know, these people are having real experiences, obvious, you know, and it's like they're meeting these beings that everybody is defining as, you know, spiritual, you know, esoteric, whatever you want to call them. But there's a real science behind dimethyltryptamine. Like, it's like that's a substance or a drug or whatever that can be measured in the actual natural world, but at the same time it's functioning, to me at least, as a portal into the spiritual world. And
well, see, the thing is, that's a very good point. I think, you know, you talk about people that have like near-death experiences,
right?
And scientists or medical people, they will sort of break down, well, that's because the body is doing this or the body is doing that.
Right. Flooded with endorphins and...
Yeah, but let's get one thing clear. That may be happening on a physical level. Right? But if the body is dying, right, it's not just physical. Right? So the whatever triggers that, it triggers a physical reaction which creates near-death experiences.
Right, where these people are like floating above
Yeah.
their body and they're seeing the
Mhm.
nurse and
Yeah.
the conversation
I
that
think
the person's having in room 2B
Yeah.
or whatever.
These people that astral trip, that are able to leave their bodies, I think it's another variant on that. I think the point I'm trying to make in over all of this is, at some point, the truth about everything, biblical times and how they really lived, and their social structure and what they did and their politics comes into it. I think the last big barrier that mankind has as a collectiveness, as a species, is to break through is extraterrestrial life. And I think if you look at how we've advanced technology and what our technology can do, and there's some stuff that's out in the world that makes you really think, if there was more physical proof than compared to biblical against some of this stuff is like really there, like the Nazca lines. I mean, you tell me, how the fuck did people from that time get to put out these wonderful patterns of animals and so on, and know exactly what they look like when they couldn't see from the sky?
Well,
Right?
yeah,
And then,
there are.
then there was,
Wait, what are we talking about? Aska lines? What?
Define a little bit what you're talking about, Tina.
well, I think for me, the last breakthrough in setting humankind free from repression, guilt, that a lot of religion, regardless of whereabouts in the world you come from, has imposed on mankind for form of control and growth of society. Once we I think human evolution is like we're growing up, right? We're in like a teenage stage as a species, in our evolvement. I think that the extraterrestrial beings, ETs, stuff like alien life, the possibility of that existing will grow more exponentially as we advance and our technology advances and our understanding, because our understanding of the universe is constantly changing. In the last few years, there was a documentary done about where these scientists from the 1970s, American scientists from 1980s, were looking for planets that were Jupiter-sized, and they were trying to detect other stars. And they were using the model based on our solar system, where Jupiter went round the sun in 22 years, 12 years? I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head right now. But what they found was, and they were beaten by a Swiss astronomer, was that they found this gas giant, right, bigger than Pluto, that was orbiting 4 million miles around from its sun, and its orbit was 4 days.
Whoa.
Right? And so it made them relook. So I guess what I'm saying is that, we have often accepted things as being the standard. This is how it is. This is how it is. We've built ourselves culturally based on education, science, whatever, over the years. I think as technology rapidly evolves, and our minds being able to retain things, and the more new things that we learn, we're going to see how different from what we thought to what really is, how different it is. And I think the point I'm making is that, to me, once the truth comes out about Christianity, Islam, I watched a very good documentary that PBS put out where they had this a black English Muslim that was who was talking about how Muhammad got started and stuff like that, and the whole reason behind the burqas and everything like that. That was actually a political thing. That was to stop his wives from being tampered with by people who were trying to use sex and discreet liaisons to gain political power and political advantage. And I think certain truths about things need to come out, before we can get right.
Yeah, I mean, there's an actual Sahih Hadith that talks about the inception of the hijab, because previous to the inception of the hijab, obviously it wasn't mandated, and it was, I'm pretty sure it was Abu Bakr, which was Muhammad's right-hand man, basically said, because you can imagine a lot of people wanted to visit him, and Abu Bakr said, hey man, you all these people running up in your house, and your wives are unveiled. So initially it was, okay, only Muhammad's wives need to be veiled. And then after that, it spread to the entire community. Everybody needed to be, because the wives of Muhammad are called Umm al-Mu'mineen, the mothers of the believers. So if they're doing it, then it spreads. Everybody's doing it. That's all open source and Sahih Hadith. So I mean,
But-
that's all there.
Can you see over time? I mean, when you look at the four Gospels, they were written 40 years after the event, told by 4 different people going out to 4 different areas. Right? And personally speaking, the problem I have with the Bible is it's been fucked with, because it's not the true word of God. It's been altered, it's been added to, it's been subtracted from. There's the whole Gospel of St. Thomas, which has been like poo-pooed because of he basically said the church is not a building, which,
Well,
you know, when you consider the time period when people were human development, you know, because it was like to, I guess, basically have people do this certain way, and then we'll have a set system. I mean, it worked with the Catholic Church, it's worked with the Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox. In Britain, we had our own little revolution, and we kicked out the Catholic Church, and all that. We have this now, the Church of England. But
the Gospel of Thomas was rejected as canonical, not because of that, but mostly because it's Gnostic. And the Gnostics, aside from the Jews, the Gnostics were the real earliest sort of contenders against Christianity. Well, honestly speaking, the aggression was really going the other way. So like the first Christians were really aggressively anti-Gnostic. So it's like Cyprian said, if you see a Gnostic in the street, cross the street, don't talk to him, blah, blah, blah. So the Gospel of Thomas is clearly a Gnostic gospel, because the Gnostics were competing for, okay, which story is going to come out as the top one. So that's why in 1 John, you hear John say, anyone who denies that Jesus has come in the flesh is the Antichrist. Because the Gnostics were saying.
Right.
The Gnostics were saying, Jesus is a spiritual being. He's not really physical. He never really came to the earth. He's an actual flesh and blood human being. And so John John says, that's the Antichrist. There's no chill. He went on savage level 100 with the Gnostics.
Yeah, but see, this is again, when we start talking about, this is kind of where I think a lot of problems have come from, is that's his interpretation. You see what I'm saying? That's what he thinks, because that's how it makes him feel, because of his prejudices, because of his personal bents, and how he sees the world. Because everyone is different.
Well, hold on for a second. John, when I say 1 John, is written by John, which was a disciple of Jesus in Jesus's inner circle, right? So, what's at stake in that particular discussion is, was Jesus actually a flesh and blood human being?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because most of the time when you have the debates about Jesus, is he a divine being? But the Gnostics were saying, of course he's a divine being, but he wasn't a flesh and blood, actual physical human. And John is writing and saying, the fuck are you talking about? I was there. I mean, he didn't say that. That's not in the Greek. But he's saying, there, I touched him, I ate with him,
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
It's not
Okay, I understand.
See what I'm saying? But I do agree with you. I mean, there are other theological debates in the New Testament that the disciples of Jesus basically said, no, this is right, these guys are wrong, that's it. And so, I mean, there's a lot of that in there, especially in the New Testament, right? So I agree with you. Of course, on the other hand, it's like, anytime that you're trying to build a culture, even in metal, there are rules that have to be followed, right? They're like, for example, if we say, okay, we're going to accept everybody, nobody's going to judge anybody, that's a rule. So then if somebody comes in and starts saying, you're not really metal if you do X, like this happens to us all the time. Somebody will say, you guys aren't real metal, right? And then we'll have like 50 people jump in and say, fuck you, they're just learning, leave them alone, right? And what's happening is metal, for the most part, and we're still kind of, babies as far as metal goes, it's about bringing in the outsider and taking the person who's marginalized and saying, you have a place here among the rest of us, misfits, right?
Yeah.
And then when somebody comes in and tries to carve out some sort of an elitist subculture, people immediately jump on it and correct it, because that's not the ethos. The ethos is, hey, all of us are going to be together and everybody who's like an outcast gets included. So I guess my point is, I want to push back on you a little bit. doesn't every subculture have a set of rules, and aren't there usually gatekeepers who will make sure that those rules get secured for the good of the whole? I don't know.
I think that's been part of the problem. I actually think that if you look at what's been established and laid down and built on and built on and built on, to me, it's kind of like fossils over the years that have been compressed down and added on and added on, or like old towns that have been built on and built on and built on and built on. It's like Chinese whispers. You know, it starts off as one thing. Well,
the telephone game.
Yeah. We call them. Where I come from, we call them Chinese whispers. I don't know why, but
I like that better.
But the point I'm
villagers.
yeah, but the point I'm making is that somewhere along the line, you know, over time, things get altered and perverted. And I don't mean perverted necessarily in a nasty way or a malicious way. It's just that when we just accept it as what is standard or what is, and I guess this refers back to my point about, you know, how when they first discovered dinosaur bones and the scientists in Britain and Europe were trying to put them together and stuff like that, and they got it wrong. And, you know, I think there's a lot of stuff that
and if you would have showed up and said that's wrong, they would have said, who the fuck are you? You ain't no
well,
science,
exactly, but
right?
that's the part of the process of our involvement. That's part of human growth. Right. I mean, if you think about it as a species, if you look at the cosmetologically over the years, right? I mean, the dinosaurs got wiped out because of the Yucatan Peninsula, the meteor that struck that Yucatan Peninsula that led to the whole downfall of that. So that species did not survive because they couldn't evolve past what they were. Mankind is really the first species on the planet that we know of, because who knows, that has the ability to withstand a cataclysmic Earth-like event like that, right? By now going into space and so on and so forth. Whereas before, we would have been fucked.
Right, you're just at the point of...
We would have been proper fucked, you know what I mean? But I think that, you know, it is our development and our understanding. I mean, for me, one of the biggest... I'm not a scientist as such. I know a lot of Republicans say that, but I'm not a Republican, but I'm saying it anyway. That our knowledge is limited, and when we did when they discovered and confirmed the Higgs boson, the God particle,
yeah.
That really, I mean, that's kind of like showing to me that God is in everything and everywhere. Stardust, everything, right? It's made of what you and I are made of, right? And I think the trouble is, for so many years, people have assumed that human reason can't compare, and therefore it's no good and you can't have it, right? So, like, it's that, to quote a line from Babylon 5, where a priest says, faith and reason are like your shoes. You can get further with both than you can with one. But sometimes, you know, one of the things, I have a friend in England, a guy called Kenny, very much, you remind me of him. You do remind me of him. But he had this sticker on his wall that said, faith is not faith until it's all you're hanging on to. And I kind of think that, I mean, when you look at heroes in movies, they have all these big guns, they lose them, they get everything, and it just comes down to a fist fight between the bad guy and them. You know, that sort of stuff that makes a great movie. I think there's a lot of point where we build ourselves up and we have all this and we prepare this and we prepare that, and really what it comes down to is between, you know, man and God. You know, whether you believe in him or not, it's that life force, that thing that we can all connect to. And I think with faith allows you to let go of fear and put your belief into action, and you sort of connect to life. And if you don't think we don't see that kind of stuff today, where we talk about people like where Jesus walked on water or turned, you know, the most common examples, you know, turned water into wine and stuff like that. You see a soldier charge a machine gun nest in a war, in a conflict, and like, you know, the odds are completely against him, but somehow he takes it out without a scratch on him, you know, without a bullet, you know, hitting him or anything. It's that kind of thing. It's the ability to let go of ourselves, and that's when I think we connect to that life force, and that's when I think great things have happened. I mean, I've experienced that in my own way, so I know miracles can happen. I know miracles can happen. I mean, I don't believe in God. I know God exists. I know, because God, to me, allows the connection between me and you, between me and Sori, and between me and every human being that I have in contact with.
I wanted to ask both of you guys, what did you think of the last, to rejoin the Pantheon alongside our ancestors? The Pantheon is like a council of gods,
Yeah.
kind of.
I think, to me, that kind of like me, I think, go back to the beginning, to those that have gone before, those that have done it before.
Yeah.
You know, there is a literal, you know, I mean, I suppose in the sense like a Valhalla, where, you know, as a warrior, you go into the Great Hall and you're with other warriors, you know, and yada, yada, and so on and so forth. It's kind of, that has that kind of element to it, you know, if you look at it literally. But I wonder if, you know, there are those that have come before and have moved on, right? And we rejoin them. And, you know, I mean, because it makes you wonder, why do we live? Why are we alive?
Well, you asked me that in the car yesterday. You didn't like my answer.
Yeah.
So we're driving. She's like, "Why are we alive? What's our purpose?" And I gave her the it's the answer.
No, I didn't like your answer.
It's the first answer to the Westminster Catechism, which is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever.
I just felt like it was just.
You didn't like that answer.
It was too churchy. It's too preachy. It was too preachy. I just wanted something mad practical. I liked that. I liked that line, and what I got from it was, I've always felt like, and I wish I had like a visual for like an example, but like, if you like the kids have like this piece of foam, and inside the foam is like all these little shapes that are like cut out, and you can pull the foam pieces out and dip it in paint and like make a star on stuff. So when you put it away, you slide it back into its little foam case, so the foam comes out. And I feel like that we were somewhere before we existed here on the earth, and that little piece, I've always felt like that. And then that little pice comes out and it journeys around. Stop, let me talk. I'm having my chance, my moment.
Yeah, tell him, Sori. Tell him.
I will. And then I feel like that
girl power.
We go, that's right. I feel like that we like go around and like we have our journey, and that's the whole like why do we exist? What's the purpose of this? Is the purpose, my assumption is that the whole purpose of this entire thing is that we would somehow come to find and know our creator in a different way than everybody else. Like we know him, I don't know. Anyway, so I feel like that at the end, and I've always felt like at the end, like when we die, we're gonna somehow rejoin back from where we came. Like, cause I feel like in myself, call me a heretic if you want, but I feel like I was somewhere else much bigger than this world before I was here. And I feel like I'm gonna join that place again.
Can I follow up on that, please?
Go for it, Tina, you're up.
I think that, to me, God and life are intertwined in the sense that life is like this ginormous moving river, right? On a colossal scale, right? And the sparks of our soul that makes us as individuals, with our own different sets of beliefs and points of views and precepts and everything like that. I think that we are a part of the reason for our existence is to add to life, is to add our own distinctiveness to the tapestry that is life.
Yeah. See, I like
you
that.
know, I think that we are part of a greater whole. I think part of that greater whole is in all of us, in each other, which is why I think the village has been such a successful thing, in that people have been connected to it regardless of whether they hate you for your Christian beliefs or love you for you doing you or whatever. There is a connection. Now, it's not for everybody. You know, not everything is for everybody. It's like there's no one set of rules for life, right? No one set of rules applies, covers from beginning to end, you know. And I think that, you know, it's about being fluid and being open to change. I mean, if you think about it, just from a Christian point of view, I've always felt that Christians today tend to listen and follow Paul more than they ever did Jesus. right?
Had that conversation.
I mean, you said it. I mean, you said all the people that are supposed men of God were fuck ups. They had their problems, right? You look at Paul before he was Paul. What kind of zealot he was. So, you know, it's like people say, "Oh, when you're born again, you are a whole new being in Christ." Yeah, that may be, but you're still you.
Right.
Right. Right. I think people tend to forget that.
Yeah.
That you still have the same problems, you still have the same things, you still have the same issues. All right.
Yeah,
and I think
you can see like
part of who Saul was came out in Paul. Absolutely. Because of his right. And I think the thing is, I mean, you look about it, the only commandment that Jesus ever gave us was to love one another.
Yeah,
right. You don't have to. You don't have to agree. You don't have to necessarily like. You know, I'm not talking about some hippie notion of love. You know, but love and accept one another, so that you can get on and make a better world. Right. And I think that what's scary, especially for someone, a trans girl like me, what's scary living in America, is we have this ideological right that are trying to basically culturally legislate me out of existence.
Do you feel that way? Like that people
sometimes this is the beauty of God. Sometimes you have a test and say, okay, God, if this is of you, you know, allow something to happen to either validate or say no. Right. And I often wonder if, like, I've been blessed. God has been extremely merciful to me. And like, sometimes I think when people think of miracles, they think of big things. I think sometimes it's like in your journey of life, when you're going from point A to point B, sometimes the distance between point A and point B might be a bit big. And the miracle can be just a small enough stepping stone to help you get from point A to point B. Now, you two, in what you're doing, will experience that, right? And sometimes things come along that are very life-affirming. I have been blessed by being surrounded by good girlfriends. I mean, I'm going to be straight up honest with you. My life has been a total fuck up. I've done things. My life is like the equivalent of like a 15-year-old who doesn't know how to drive, who's behind the wheel of a supercar. My life has just been like careering into everything. I've done things, I've achieved things. But I'm at the point where like, I'm not sure where I'm going now, in the sense that I feel like I'm in a waiting room. You know, I think a lot of this time is for me to develop myself. And I think that I don't know what's going to happen literally from one day to the next. I'm just content to live in the moment. You know, I've had some like funny stories. Like one time back in London, I used to DJ, not like dance DJ, but like play records, kind of like what you do, but without the review part, you know, just play music at underground shows. And I've seen some big shows. One time I got to meet Jerry Cantrell. I don't know if you know who that is. From Alice in Chains. Oh. And he turned out to be a bit of a prick, shall we say. But he was wearing this bright gold jacket, you know, the kind that you can see from space. And he came in because the DJ booth was next to the at the Camden. I can't remember, the London Astoria 2. I forgot the name, they renamed it. I think it was called the Mean Fiddler. But it was like London Astoria was like two venues in one. There was downstairs, which held about 800 people. There was an upstairs that had like about 2,000. I saw Cradle of Filth there, the original lineup. I mean, that back in 1998. And props and shout out to you for your review on Tearing the Veil from Grace. I love the reviews where you can go off and just talk, because I can get lost in it. You know, I'm not that educated, really. I don't know as much as you do, but I know some things, you know, and I know from knowing through experience, through faith. You know, people talk about faith, you know, but my real life experience of that one time was I was dating my ex who was from here. And one time I didn't have quite enough money. I was crashing on one of my girlfriend's living room floors back in London. And I was like working temp because I was literally like spending 3 months in the US, then coming home back to England, saving the money, going back because I could do that being from Britain. You don't need a visa. You just get an I-94 visa waiver, good for 90 days, boom.
Yep.
And I didn't, it was the night I was due to fly back. I had a ticket back to San Antonio, but not a ticket back to Britain. And they wouldn't let me on the plane without a ticket back to Britain, right? So it's the night before my ex's birthday. And I've got her on the phone at 3 a.m. crying her eyes out because I don't have the money to get a ticket. So I went to bed, woke up a few hours later, and immediately I found this company called Air India that had the tickets. I could afford the tickets, but I couldn't afford the tax. So I called my biological father, who I hadn't spoken to in a couple of years, right? And I never got through to him normally. But this time he picked the phone up straight away. He paid the tax for me. I got my ticket, and I was gonna go take the bus down to the Heathrow Airport. And by this point, I would have missed my plane, right? So I was going to come up with some bullshit story or what have you and get them to reschedule me. But the plane that I was due to leave on got delayed 2.5 hours, which pre 9/11 was the exact amount of time you needed for international check-in. So, people have their own stories of faith.
Yeah.
And I think, it's up to us to listen to them, and that's where you see God, not necessarily in all the fancy formal things, but sometimes in small ways, in quiet ways, and I think, that's kind of how my life has been.
Yeah, God speaks in one way and in two, but man does not perceive it.
No, I was thinking of the other one. Oh, go ahead.
The still small voice?
Yeah, the small voice where there was a wind, there was a this, there was all this craziness. God wasn't in those things, but then along comes this small voice, and God was in that.
That's where God was, yeah. Yeah, instead of all the big giants.
Everyone, look, whether people find God or not, or whatever it is that floats their boat or gets them by, I think the point is, and this is kind of another reason why I fell in love with you guys and what you're doing, is that I was a born-again Christian. I'm not a born-again Christian. I'm me. I've evolved past the need for a Bible, for a church. I'm living my life. I'm doing this is how God wants it to be, right? And whoever God puts in my life, for whatever reason, it's none of my business. If God wants to use me to deal with someone, it's none of my goddamn business how it's used. If I'm just used, I'm used. Okay. Sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's painful, but, I'm just, whatever it is. And I don't put any claim or stock to lift myself up as by that. It's just as a matter of fact. I don't see myself as being any different from anybody else, any better or any worse. I'm just a human being. And I think, part of, we all need to feel somehow to differentiate ourselves because we have this need to feel superior and right, and I think once humankind evolves past that, then the next stage of our development will really kind of kick in. And I think, which takes me back, you talk about on strange loops, which takes me back to my point about, I believe that extraterrestrials is the last barrier that mankind has to go through. The last, because religions have either been proven or disproven or whatever, and history has shown different things. It's like when Christians talk about the world being created in 7 days. Excuse me, but who the fuck said 7 days in heaven is the same as 7 days on earth?
Right.
Which gives rise to the explanation of how the physical universe is 15 billion light years, and it's 13.3 billion years old, because there is no corporeal time in the spiritual dimension.
Augustine,
as Jesus says, 1,000 days is as 1,000 years is as 1 day. And then what that means is literally it's the same. It's the same thing. There is no time.
Augustine in the 4th century speculated on that. He basically said, how could we possibly know how time is being measured at that point?
Well, I think it's because in Genesis it says, then there was evening and there was morning, or there was morning and there was evening the second day. So it keeps referencing the morning and the evening being 1 day.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what?
Like I was saying yesterday, Genesis is not meant to answer scientific questions. So like when I see like scientific breakdowns of Genesis 1, I'm always like skeptical, like, oh, okay, like, yeah. So like I want to talk a little bit about the musicianship and the guitars, because I love here's what I loved about the guitars on this song particularly. So they had very atmospheric moments, right? They were like clearly like purposeful atmospheric moments, but it wasn't like a keyboard or synth or anything. It was like he had his pedal, I could tell, but like he was using the guitar to create the atmosphere, and they were not really heavily reliant. And then no disrespect to Debu or Cradle at all, because we both gave them very high ratings. It was just, I really appreciated the atmosphere being set by the guitar.
Exactly.
I feel like that is, like I said, no, I mean, I talk to Lindsay every day from Cradle, so like I love that, but it's like I think it's more, there's this guy hunting, right, and he talks about, you have some people that hunt with a rifle. Well, this dude goes out with a bow and arrow, and he's like, it is much more difficult to take down a deer with a bow and arrow than it is to take down a deer with a rifle. And I feel like that's like, to create that type of atmosphere on a guitar. Granted, I get it, he was using a pedal for sure, but I'd love to see this guy's pedal board. Have you seen this live, by the way? Have you seen these guys live?
No, I haven't had the chance to see them live because they don't play like massive amounts of shows.
Anytime I hear stuff like this, I'm like, I want to see them pull that shit off live.
Actually, I'll tell you what, I'll go you one better. He has actually got videos on YouTube of him showing you how he does it.
Okay.
So I'll send you some links. Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, I mean, the heavy parts, obviously I love the heavy parts, but like the atmospherics, the fact that they stayed with the guitar, like that was one of the things that did it for me. What about you?
It's the soundscapes at that scale. I mean, you imagine, like, you see how, like, I mean, the opening riff, once you got past the intro, is kind of like Sad But True times 10.
Right.
And this is what the sound that he creates, just here from guitar, and builds on such a scale of heaviness and size. It's colossal. I mean, there are some tracks on the album that will probably take you musically to places you've never been or heard on guitar before. And it's a track on this album, and that's kind of the reason why I sent you the link that I did for it initially, was because it gives you the whole album so you can play with it at your leisure. But there's a song called Inside the God Mind, and that you might enjoy. It's like probably the most fucked up song on the album in terms of intensity. And it kind of cuts into an instrumental called The Outer Dark, and it kind of tells us almost like the story of, just like, how I imagine you think how significant we are compared to God. Well, imagine us in our little selves meeting God in his full size and scope and everything, and then being flung out into the outer dark. And that's what the instrumental that follows that before the title track is called The Outer Dark, and it's a mindfuck.
Wow. What do you think of the musicianship?
I liked it. There was parts where I felt like I was on like this journey. Like at first, like the person was like running like on this, I don't know, it seemed like it was like evening time, and they were like running on this empty road, and it was like vast open expanse. And then all of a sudden, like they hit like another season, and it was like winter and cold, and their hair was like frozen. They looked kind of like, I don't know, like it was just like seasons of life, and it was just like kind of going through like, and it's part of the journey and stuff. So I like that. And I agree with you, and I don't know if this was on the recording part or not, Tina, but when you were talking about music and how like driving fast in a car, or like the music can make you like that, like I'm like that. Like when I push that pedal down and I hear that engine and I feel that speed, I friggin' love it. It's just so
yeah. Well, see, I don't drive. For me, it comes in music.
Well, it was
and
the same
sometimes
for me, the song and that, it was like that excitement inside. I was like, yes.
Yeah, these guys, the musicianship, I'll have to hear more, but this is one of my more favorite guitarists as a guitarist. Like, I just really, really respect that. Not making it clear. Don't message me or email me and say, you don't like keyboards. Actually, I didn't say I didn't like keyboards. What I said was I appreciate how difficult it is to create a soundscape like that and just say, I'm going to stay on the guitar and do that shit. And then transition to some fucking heavy shit. God almighty. What do you give the song?
I think, well, first of all, yeah, I'm sure it would be even better if there was the headphones, but we were doing it without the headphones, so that, like, you can't get that in that. I
felt like there were layers that we were missing.
Yes,
I'm going to listen to this on the headphone right after this discussion. Go ahead.
I guess I'm going to have to go with like an 8.5, but I would have gone higher probably if I had had the headphones, but.
I'll tell you what would have made me go higher than 8.5. I had 8.5 in my head. This is a concept record.
Yeah.
So I guarantee you, this song probably closes out the record perfectly. And because of that, probably if I'd have been able to listen to the album straight through, I would have said, this is probably one of the best ways to end a concept record, period.
Yeah.
Because of how intelligently he ends the lyrics. Because,
Why Did We Live?
Right, because the first song, like I said, was Why Do We Live? And so it's like, that would
it kind of stinks because it's like, now you're obviously not alive. Why did we? It's like, the question is still unanswered. You went through all that.
Well, which it's the only way you could end on a loop.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you came to a definitive answer, then it would completely undo the concept of a loop in the first place.
That's true.
Right? Like, so it's an 8.5 for me, but I feel like two things like hamstrung it that is no fault of its own. One is we didn't have the headset. And two, we got to figure out the technology how to do that. And then two, we I didn't get to hear the album start to finish. And I think this would have been that's one of the things, like.
All right, I tell you what. Let's. I gave this song, the whole album, a 9 in some parts and an 8.5 in others.
What'd you give this song?
This song, I would give a flat out 10 because it's not the best song ever, for sure, but it's a great metal song. And it's part of the reason why I chose this specific track, because I wanted to give you guys something that wasn't going to be over in 4 or 5 minutes, that was going to give you enough variation to listen to, that would give you some slow parts. I mean, there was 3 guitar solos in that song.
So part of me felt like there was a little bit of prog in this song too. Like it was a little more progressive than just.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Standard, but I didn't want to come off all weird because then all the Opeth people were going to come after me. But like, did you get that feeling in this song that there was a little bit of prog, that they were going a little bit outside?
There is.
Death metal or whatever you want to call it.
There is a lot of progressive elements in all their music. I mean, their first album, which came out 16 years ago, I think, was called Forever Advancing Legions. And that is considered one of the best death metal albums in the last 2 decades. But it's much more brutal, I mean, in terms of sound and delivery. Much more underground in terms of like recording. The album that followed that, called Worlds Beyond the Veil, was for me the album that kind of just lit all my bells in terms of that kind of style of music. As far as like maybe death metal goes, I mean, there are probably more technical death metal bands. There are more probably better players. But I think for what they do, and I think this is the success of any band, from the smallest band right up to bands like Cradle of Filth, they've created their own identity and they're making it work and they're selling. Now, sure, these are underground bands. We're not talking about bands that when I had my label, I did press releases, CD releases of 1,000 units a run. And let me tell you something, if you think you've got bad CD problems now, have you ever seen a 1-bedroom apartment, a 600 square foot 1-bedroom apartment with 2,500 CDs? Yeah. Yeah. So I would say for me on this album, this song is the crowning glory of this album in terms of tying everything together. It does its job. Is it the best song on the album? Probably not. It's, for me, the most standout track, which would be one I'd like to recommend to you guys to listen to next, in your own personal time, is called Between Cilia and Shoutouts, which is like another term for between the devil and the deep blue sea, between, do or die. It's, it's an absolute. And that song is only 3.5 minutes, right? And it's built on just two riffs, but it rocks like a motherfucker. There's the song that follows that, Time Never Lasts. That's a really good song. There's a section in there that just makes you feel like you're 100 feet tall and you're flying. On the guitar, there's lots of good albums that they produced, and none of them are bad. They have their own fans that like. Some might like the album that came before this, called Behind the Shadows Lies Madness. And then they say some that like Worlds Beyond the Veil, some like prefer their first album. Where the band goes from in their next development, who knows? Because Leon is now the only original member left. Rainer has quit doing music, which is because that's how people's lives are. Sometimes things like families come first, kids, that kind of stuff. But in terms of how Mithras fit into metal overall, they're still kind of like niche-y, which is in some ways kind of cool. But I think if part of the reason why I chose this band over some other bands was because I just think that people would really dig what they do. And that whole section after that opening heavy crushing riff, then there's that sound that you go, especially if you've never heard sounds like this before, you go, what the fuck is that? How's he doing that on guitar? And then it goes into that whole up and down section, and then into that solo. What was your thoughts of that solo? Because I was watching you, but on my phone, you were a tiny little screen, and I couldn't see your reactions properly because I wanted to see what Vinny thought of that first solo when it kicked in.
Oh, I loved it. I really genuinely did. I had made
Kirk who?
I made
Kirk who? Huh? Kirk who? Kirk who?
Oh yeah. Well, no, he definitely got him. The last couple solos I've heard from Kirk have been pretty. I don't know. He's been doing it for 50 years.
Yeah.
I just don't think he has a passion anymore. But I was gonna say about this solo, I'd made a mental note, and I'm glad you brought it up. Is like a lot of solos, like you listen to it and you say, okay, what the hell was the point of that? Like, oh, you went to music school, so everybody knows that you know how to scale. Great. But like this solo fit with the song, it added to the song, and the song would have been the same without it, in my opinion. In my opinion, the song would have been the same without the solo. When
that solo, when you got that whole section, and when they had just before it, when they got really heavy and epic, and then that solo kicked in, that's to get that tingle, that elation, because like you're going, what the fuck, man? Because like their whole music is filled with solos like that and sounds. I mean, if you get a chance, you check out the opening track of the album called Why Do We Live. It's very different. There's no riffs. It's just like a chord sound progression.
Whoa.
With a very different kind of beat, not traditional necessarily with blast beats or stuff like that. It's a kind of very different song. And the lyrics to that are kind of poignant too.
Yeah, this band is, I'm hoping that once we put this out into the atmosphere, more villagers will ask for it, so we can have it as a mainstay.
Okay.
Well,
not a mainstay.
You're gonna get some people that like it.
Yeah.
We can repetitively review.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, 8.5.
But you'll get some people that will like it. You'll get some people that will compare it to Morbid Angel. But I think musically, what they do is so unique that, I mean, they've been around for such a long time. I mean, this record is on Willowtip here in the US. I can't remember what it is in Europe and other parts of the world, but I mean, you can stream it live on YouTube, I mean, and just listen to it. It's a great album. There's some fantastic guitar playing on that. And I think that, you know, what I like about it also is, I don't know if you found this yet, but certain black metal, and you will find this as you get deeper into black metal, certain sounds create certain energy and certain feelings and certain vibrations that are quite dark. And some of the stuff that I would you know, I'm going to toss your way gets real fucking dark. You probably won't like it. But what I liked about this album and this band in particular is their energy is very positive. Their energy is very, very positive. You know, it's uplifting. It's something that, you know, I think, you know, a lot of people who don't necessarily want the darkness that goes with listening to something like Behemoth or something like that, that could enjoy this, you know, because there isn't necessarily religious connotations. There isn't satanic connotations, you know, especially on this record.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so 8.5, 8.5, 10. Been out.
Sorry, out.
Tina out.
Gone.